Hello, Olumide.
Hi, Shay. Good.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm fine. Yeah, we are
It's
live.
really good to yes, I see we're live. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining on today's episode of the Climate uh, um, on the Climate Wednesday show of the Climate Wednesday chats. I just wanted to have a little chat with Olumide before we go get into the conversation. How have you been?
I'm fine. Oh, we thank God. It's good.
It's
We have
really
been
good,
putting
really, really
it.
good to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So to those joining for the first time, welcome. This is the Climate Wednesday, and it's a chat that we have every Wednesday, as the name implies. It's basically, a conversation with different stakeholders, different people, and we try to spotlight different issues as long as it has to do with climate, environment, sustainability, and we also love to put in focus the youth angle of all of this. Today is a very special edition, as I would love to call it, because we don't have a guest, we don't have it's more like uh, bringing to focus environmental restoration, and it's just going to be a very interesting chat between Olumide, IDOWU, and I. For those who do not know, Olumide Idowu is the co-founder of the International Climate Change Development Initiative. We love to call it Climate Wednesday for short. And he's got a lot of, very interesting profile. He's a digital and communication expert. He's, has many years of experience and training with different groups, UN groups, local groups, and is one of the leading young people when it comes to environmental issues in Nigeria. He has over 12 years experience with communications, environmental sustainability, and he has also represented Nigeria and Africa at well over 20 high-level global governance meetings that has to do with sustainable development, including the Conference of Parties. Welcome again, Olumide, and thank you so much for for inviting me to have this chat with you on today's episode, on today's edition of the Climate Wednesday. So, how do we start? The topic today is ecosystem restoration. What comes to mind when you hear ecosystem restoration? Let's start from that.
Wow. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Shay. Thank you for reading those profile. Yeah, basically, like everybody have been saying for the past three Wednesdays, we've been talking about ecosystem restoration, and the major conversation is how this ecosystem is actually supporting practices that of ecological and restoration, and how we can start looking at the recovery of our ecosystem. And it also talks to nature, because if we don't talk about our ecosystem, then what is the importance of our living? So the ecosystem comprises of how we see conservation, how we see the entire environment, and how we're looking at goods and services when it
Mm.
comes to what we human being actually depends on. And the ecosystem also, like I can call it, is like a survivor for every human on earth. And I think it's one of the biggest conversation that a lot of environmentalists is looking at, because it's like a support system for everybody to exist in life. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely agree. And I think it's a very important topic, and I'm glad that that has been, part of the core themes, the topics that has been discussed since the World Environment Day 2021, which happened a few weeks, about 3 weeks ago, June 5th of June. And pretty much, I love how it's already, the conversation has been bringing to fore measures to prevent and halt the damage that we've seen from our interaction with nature, how we're exploring nature, but not just exploring, but seeing that we can be part of the healing process for nature. It's like when you have an item or maybe an animal, for instance. Maybe, good to put in perspective. You have a dog that is agile and very lively. And after a while, you begin to feel something isn't right with this dog, and you now begin to put in the efforts. So what does it need? Is it food? Is it exercise? Is it this? You make your research, and then the results, the success of that is that maybe a few weeks after, you can now see that animal coming back to life and feeling very agile. And that's exactly the concept when it comes to nature. I mean, the planet, this is the only planet we have, and then the earth is something that we must nurture, something that we must, be deliberate about in how we interact with it, how we explore, how we use the resources. So let's talk about some examples, Olumide. You've been on the field for a while, and you have some experiences. So maybe we can start home on the African continent, and then we can look at a global perspective. So what are some, African specific efforts to achieve ecosystem restoration, as you say it?
Okay, thank you, Sheyi. And like what you've said, a lot of us actually depend on this, and we are looking towards how we can make sure that our environment is more actually conducive when it comes to putting structure or putting things in place. But let me first of all, let us know that nature restoration has come, and we just need to start looking at how we can embrace it as a people. And the issue of conservation has also taken the lead in making sure that we safeguard our people and safeguard the future generation. And looking at some key from what you've said, why is actually important, or looking at the example from Africa, you can see that looking at the kind of contribution, like there's a research that says that by 2050, is almost 95% of the earth's land will be degraded. So what has happened to Africa when it comes to land restoration, when it comes to degradation? And if you look at the northern part of the country, what is actually happening is making us to understand that if we don't take care of the nature now, then
Mhm.
what is going to be left to our future? We see desert encroachment. A lot of people are talking about the issue of how land grabbing. All these things are very, very key conversation that you and I, as citizens or as a people, need to start getting our mind towards. How much effort, not only the government, how much effort are we putting into implementation to make sure that we safeguard even if it's a little land, how many safe space do we have in Nigeria again? How many land, how many space can we say that it is meant for or nature, or it's meant for conservation? What are we doing to make sure that we are not only talking, but we are also taking responsibility, and we are also making effort in implementing what we are actually talking about? Let me start by saying, what happens to how we sustain life on earth to the people, our food system, what is happening is a very key conversation. What is happening to our relationship with nature? How many of us have been contributing? I say how many of a lot of us actually are contributing to the failure on how we relate to the nature, because of the act we are doing, or because of the emotion that we are putting in place. So there are a lot of big examples that we can say. Kenya, with their rich biodiversity nation, with their rich nature, with their rich conservation, they are still facing a lot of big problems. But the bottom line is, what is you and I? What is our relationship with nature? And are we making sure that we are contributing positively to it?
Very important questions, and very important point you raised there. Just to also put in perspective, I was saying in the news recently that Ghana, the Ghanaian president, launched this "Let's Go Planting" campaign in Ghana that has some very ambitious plan to put in the ground 5 million trees. As small as this may be, I was very impressed with how specific the plan was, the details of actualizing it, and I think that is really, really, really something encouraging. Like you rightly said, Olumide, when it comes to ecosystem restoration, it's not about how big we want to dream. It's usually about how small we want to act. And I think it's very important that as individuals we can now see the bigger picture, but then streamline it to the very little specific things that we can do to effect a change. And you raised the point earlier talking about research and what have you. And I recall that on, I think it was the 10th of June, 5 days after the World Environment Day, there was this IPBS report. That's the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Environment Ecosystem Services. And they released a report that really showed the degradation that we've experienced in our biodiversity and how this is largely linked to climate change. And this leads to my next question, which is basically about the connection between climate change and biodiversity and our ecosystem. So how can we get people to understand that these two things are linked? There are deniers springing up every now and then, different narratives that we hear on different sides of the room, talking about how climate change is just propaganda, how it should be dissociated from other spheres of our lives. But you as an expert, you as a young person that has been in the field, how would you connect the dots between climate change and ecosystem restoration? You have to mute on mute.
Okay,
Yes.
so yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the biggest problem we have as don't let me say young people now. Let me say as a people is that we don't really have much understanding of how things are. Like for instance, there's a post that went on today when they say, "What is your what is climate change in your language?"
Mm.
A lot of people, yeah, I saw it online today, and a lot of people were responding. Like I was fascinating to see a lot of people saying climate change in Swahili, saying climate change in different languages that I've never heard in my life. But this is my key point here: is that the issue of climate change and the issue of biodiversity or ecosystem restoration, they actually interlink. And the bottom line is climate change is affecting habitats of several species, and which we can say most is either adapt or to mitigate to areas with more favorable conditions. And if we can understand that, we understand that it is very essential to see that the connection is not far-fetched, it's just within us. So for us to now say we want to take care of our ecosystem, and for us to say that we want climate action, then we are calling for a bigger ambition statement to see that even small change in average temperature can actually have a significant effect or impact on our ecosystem. So they are all working together so that we can actually achieve those stories, conversation as an implementation phase. And the interconnection between nature or ecosystem or climate change is actually when we are looking at the loss we have seen in, is it species or is it running away of animals, or how we are responding to goods and services, and how are those things, looking at the range of ecosystem functions in the space that we are now. And one thing again is, what is the point or what is the key value? You mentioned something which I said before about research. How many of us have been able to see that when we look at ecosystem and climate change, when we do a in-depth, or let me say, when we do a thorough research into what is affecting these two phases, we'll be able to understand that there's no difference between the problem that is affecting them. The only issue here is that the commitment What are the commitments towards those key points that is connecting them together? And that is why I mentioned that it is very important that we have healthy ecosystem, we have rich biodiversity, and all these are the fundamental of how we are contributing to the planet. And we need to start looking at that as very important key thing.
I hear you clearly, Olumide, and I see your point about synergy. You've stressed the need for synergy, the need for different parties, multi-sectoral engagement. You've also identified how we are at a ticking time bomb. Like the time is ticking, and there is a need for that urgent action as soon as it can be. One other thing that I see you've done is how you try to link this clearly with the Sustainable Development Goals. I see you touched on, about 5 of the goals: climate action, life on land, life on water, zero hunger, and decent job also. That is great. The next part of this conversation, we'll talk about finance, but I just want to say again to everyone who's watching this, who has joined this is Climate Wednesday. It's a conversation, that we have on the Climate Talk, on the ICCDI platform. Climate Wednesday platform, where we try to just educate people, let people understand what are these different components when it comes to environmental issues, sustainability, and particularly we try to stress the role of young people. And my guest today is the co-founder of the ICCDI platform, Olumide IDOWU, a friend, a mentor to many other young people, and we've been discussing ecosystem restoration. Yes, in the first part of this conversation, he has set the background and has also talked about some specifics as to the connection between ecosystem restoration and climate change. The next part of this conversation, we'll talk about finance, and then we'll talk about the engagement of young people. But for all those joining out there, feel free to type your questions. If you're joining on Facebook, on YouTube, just put in your questions there and we'll see it and we'll take some time to discuss it. I see Samuel has already sent something. But we'll come back to all the questions. Please keep them rolling in. Olumide, so let's talk about finance. Every action, there's it's just the way things work. For every action, there should be something propelling that action. So if we're saying, hey guys, it's time for ecosystem restoration, it's time to, restore nature to what it should be. It's also human action that has taken away from nature what it was. So it's also, a corresponding or even greater action that can restore it to what we want it to be. And that has to do with finance. How can we mobilize resources that are necessary to see that we can, achieve ecosystem restoration?
Okay, thank you very much. I want to make this focus based on not only on young people, because we are going to be going into that after this, but I want to make it more broader, nationwide, international wide. The issue of climate, the issue of finance now is something that is Nigeria as a country. We are not really tapping into that wide opportunity. Let me give you a scenario. I don't know whether you were also in a call today by the EU in Nigeria about the climate conversation, and I was fortunate to ask a question on climate finance. And one of the key things I think is happening to our financing to different ecological or different climate or environmental issue is that Nigeria, we are yet to maximize the opportunity of driving finance towards our activities and projects. And why am I saying this? Don't you think we need to start looking at a climate change issue, restoration issue, as a bottom approach? Because when you drive a conversation or you drive an activities locally, the funding partners or the funding institutions, they will be able to see the need to put money in the right place. But when you are developing a financial structure at the higher level and there is no basics or there's no data to show why that finance is being developed or financing is being developed, then it is going to be very hard for financing any program on any activities. And you also know that institutions are looking for partnership that can be sustainable. And that's why you see a lot of institutions are moving closer to the government, so that because when government drive a program, it helps them to track activities. So financing all these programs need a bottom approach mechanism, so that they'll be able to know what they are putting forward for the people. They'll be able to understand what people are actually facing when it comes to financing activities or financing a project. And as we all know, I'm sure a lot of people have understood about that. We have the GCF, we have the JEF, we have this different kind of finance structure, that Nigeria is one of the biggest country, one of the powerful country that have the opportunity to drive finance for our nature or our environmental program. Why did I say so? Because number one, our population have speaks for us. Number two, the way we see ourselves at the African Union level is a very powerful institution, and we are also a country that is contributing to that. The number of young people, as we say concerning our data, 80 million young people in Nigeria. How are we using those data to drive resources, to drive finances towards ecosystem restoration, towards climate smart agriculture, and what have you? Another thing again is, who is driving this finance for us? Because that one also matters a lot. We cannot say that one body should drive the finance, but collaborative efforts. And that is why every sector is needed when you are making plans or we are putting budgeting plans for any activities towards development. So financing ecosystem restoration is a very big conversation, and is a big issue for financial institutes, because some people will say there is money, but we don't know where to put the money to. Why? Because the bottom approach system is not really working. So if you are fighting for a community that is suffering from oil spillage, how do you get their needs? How do you understand what you need to put forward for the institutions or financial institutions to support this need? So we need a grassroots, or we need a local driven collaboration to develop a financial mechanism for programs and projects.
Totally agree. I totally agree with that, Olumide. And as you may have seen also in the interim report, the interim NDC that was submitted a few weeks back to the UNFCCC, there was, mentions of the government's plan to put in some financial institution. We know the green bond is active. There's the second, and there's a plan to launch the third one currently. We also know that there is the finance strategy that the Ministry of Environment under the Department of Climate Change is looking into, as well as the trust fund. And you raised some very important point there. One other point I just think we could also add to it is the transparency with how these things work. So what's the transparency? If we say, hey, we have the structure, a climate finance strategy or a trust fund for climate or environmental subjects or cases, what's the transparency as to how these things work? I think it's also good for us to ask questions about that. Talking about questions, there's a question from Samuel Okori here. He's asking us, what is Nigeria's plan for the Great Green Wall, which is a movement that is driven to restore our ecosystem and regenerate our dry lands? And that goes back to some of the examples you gave earlier when I asked you about specific African continent-based examples of ecosystem restoration. The Great Green Wall is an example. So even though this question should be to the government, let's see how you respond to it. What is Nigeria's plan for the Great Green Wall, which is a movement that is driven to restore our ecosystem and regenerate our dry lands?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that question is a question for the government. But one thing again is that from what I've seen, and let me quickly, I'm sure a lot of people understand the Great Green Wall. It's an African lead project, and this actually is aimed to create largest living structure, on planet, and is a is a new natural wonder that will actually help to move the Sahel region. I was in a call 2 weeks or a week ago with the UNDP's African region, and we're talking about the Sahel region, but that one was focusing on energy. But looking at the Great Green Wall project and streamlining it to Nigeria, number one, we need to establish the fact that the initiative is to restore 100 million hectares of current degraded land across the Sahel region. And also, we are looking at 250 million tons of carbon and to create 100 green jobs. See, these efforts supposed to, let me say supposed to, provide fertile land, provide food security, and strengthen the region's resilience to climate change. But the context of Nigeria, and I'm very happy because this year the UN focused on ecosystem restoration for the World Environment Day. And I think moving forward, a lot of people will still be talking about ecosystem restoration. And moving also to the project of the Great Green Wall and coming down to Nigeria as a country. What we know was that we're supposed to plant 25 million trees as a contribution to this Great Green Wall. What we know was supposed to be driven and drive by the young people. What we know was supposed to drive resources, financing to support the people, let me say the people now, to plant those trees. What we also know was that it will safeguard our environment. It will put our nature into proper structure, and it's going to add value to our NDCs. So what we've seen is that a lot of stories, a lot of conversation has been going on. To be very frank with you, it is what they tell us that we know. What they don't tell us, we don't know. Like you said, transparency is very, very key. But let me tell you, like what Samuel said, the question said, the movement that is driven to restore our ecosystem and regenerate our dry lands. Samuel, I'm throwing back the question to you. Can you give me an example of that land that has already regenerated? Or the land that has been able to...
I will just jump in. I will just jump in there,
Okay.
Olumide. I mean, it's usually very, very, maybe depressing sometimes when there are very ambitious goals. 25 million trees will be planted within this year, engaged, led by young people. And after a year, we get reports about 80% of that has been successfully achieved. And you're asking the questions, wait, where are the trees planted? Who were the guys that, really did this planting process? Did they follow the structure of it, getting young people to take the lead? So this is why we must also educate people about these issues and be vocal. It's not always about, hey, government said this, hey, they are wrong. But about, oh, government, we hear you. This is what you've said. Now show us the proof. Show us the places. Give us the, let us see the people you've engaged. That's exactly how the government should be interfacing. That's where transparency comes to play. That's how to get the buy-in of people at individual or maybe even as a group of people. As we take this conversation, as we bring this conversation to a close, I want to, reflect on the words of Sean Melbourne, which was also echoed by by Katrina Lang. For those who don't know, Sean Melbourne is, the head of climate change department at the British High Commission covering West Africa, and Katrina is the deputy, the British High Commissioner. And both of them, on two separate occasions, have said that nature-based solutions, ecosystem restoration, will be at the core of COP26, which will take place in Glasgow a few months from now. Now, one thing that I'm curious about, which I guess you're also thinking about, Olumide, is how exactly can this COP26 mobilize global response to ecosystem restoration? Do you have thoughts or recommendations as to how the COP26 can be used as an avenue to mobilize global response to this?
Okay, thank you, Sheyi. I think one of the key things that we need to start doing is how are we taking the contribution of the people or young people towards ecosystem restoration very important. I can tell you that a lot of young people, a lot of organizations are doing a lot of things to contribute. And that's why one of our awareness and campaign as young people is that we think big and we start small. That little ones we are doing in our environment, how can that contribute to our success story in coming COP? You know, we don't even know who and who is attending COP. We don't even know what is going to be the message that we are taking to COP as young generation, or for the elderly people, because most of them don't tend to have the opportunity to even know what they are negotiating on our behalf. So I think, firstly, we need some institutions to help us to drive this movement, this conversation. We have a lot of embassies in Nigeria, and most of them are also talking about ecosystem restoration. I was shocked about the call this morning because a lot of people don't know about it, that the EU is supporting a conversation on climate change. Must it be only conversation, or what is going to be the implementation strategy after the conversation? And what is now going to be the story or the message you are taking to COP through the ministry or through the federal government of Nigeria? So it is high time for everybody to start looking at what is my own little contribution that will lead or support our message to COP26. A national message from the government to say, this is what we are taking to COP, or we hear the message when we are back. So it is very important that we know that position that we are putting in place in COP. We don't want to now hear in COP that we are going to be planting 50 billion trees. Or we don't want to hear when we are in COP that we want to, end gas flaring by 2050. Can we start looking at that conversation from the ground? I will not lie to you, my brother. Nigerian government, we have the potential. The government have the potential to make the changes. The only thing we need to do is that collaborative efforts, carrying people along to understand that even they are saying that it is not easy, we will see it ourselves when we are part of the conversation and part of the implementation. And I can tell you, if we continue to do that, COP26 is going to be a successful event for Nigeria when we already set our conversation straight. We know that Nigeria is not talking about gas as an alternative. So how can we be part of that conversation to see whether gas is the best solution? Nobody have seen, I don't know whether there is a campaign around that gas is now our best solution, because I heard it a lot in different messages now, in different calls. How can we now start saying that because of COVID, we move our ending of gas flaring to 2030? So it is a robust conversation about, and I'm sure you also know the Nigeria for Nature campaign, which is a campaign that I don't think a lot of young people know about it. How can every young people now take their own responsibility in that campaign and start moving forward to say, this is what have been achieved? We both know about the Nigerian Climate Innovation Hub, and I'm very happy that the DCC also mentioned it in the call today, that they are looking forward to have an event to make sure that that come to pass, so that a lot of ideas are lying down in different communities that can contribute little to saving the environment, saving nature in their respective environments. If that idea we saw in Gombe can solve the only Gombe environment, then we can now take it as a case study or implementation to another state. If that idea we see in Kano, that idea we see in Nasarawa can work fantastically well in Nasarawa, then what happens whereby somebody in Ogun State cannot implement? If Loma is working in Lagos and everybody is liking the idea of Loma, why can't we have Oyoma in Oyo State? Do you get it? So there are a lot of things that we can put forward towards COP26 or towards our planning and implementation. But let me end by saying that ecosystem is our survivor. That we need, if we don't talk about it now, then when do we want to talk about it, and when do we see the solution working for us? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olumide. I mean, I've been really, really impressed with the quality of the conversation today. I also want to say thank you to all those that have joined us on Twitter, on Facebook, and also on YouTube to be part of this conversation about ecosystem restoration. We've touched on a lot of things, and I hope, I mean, you can listen again and maybe take some notes of the important points we've raised, some examples we've given as to what is working nationally, look into how Nigeria can make of efforts to restore nature from COP26, which will be happening. We talked a bit about finance, financial resources. We also looked into the roles of young people. And just a few minutes ago, a few seconds ago, we ended by making some very strong recommendations as to why and how this can be achieved and how this can be um, made possible. I want to say thank you again, Olumide, for the time and all the efforts that you put into making this a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much. Do you have any last words?
Thank you, Sheyi. What I just want to tell my friends, my colleague, everybody out there is that climate change actually means changing habits. If you can start looking at changing your habit towards the environment, then every one of us will continue to see the dividends, let me call it, or the positive part of the gain. And this message is also towards the government. We are no more a spectator as young people, as private sector, as civil society. Even we have the people we call I will have the vulnerable people, let me put them like that. Nobody is spectator in this conversation again, most especially young people and the private sector, because we can drive a lot of actions. And when you are looking at implementations, we are always ready to support that. So the government should look for that possible way to synergize and to create that strong partnership so that when they make ambitions for us or when they push for a comment for us in the global scenes, for us, it will be very interesting to us to also be part of that implementation, rather for us to start hearing numbers, figures that we cannot see in an implementation way. So I think the government have a lot to do, and we're always ready to have the cover. And the two institutions, we look forward to see your support to make sure that everybody are part of that your financial support to every activity. So, like I said, we are no more a spectator. We want to rather be part of it and to also be part of the implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olumide. And my parting words to everyone who's watching or will watch this even after now is that we are a part of nature. Like Olumide has said, I agree fully that we're a part of nature. And we have our roles that we can play as little as it can, as we may see it. We have duties that it is our duty to care for the environment and an healthy ecosystem means healthy life to every one of us. Lastly, I would like to end with the words of Rachel Carson, a very respected writer and environmentalist. And she says, the more clearly we can find focus on our attention on the wonders and the realities of the universe about us, the less we shall have taste for its destruction. So pretty much we should be looking at, we should be appreciating nature a lot more, and then we can have less taste to destroy nature. Thank you again for joining us on this Climate Wednesday. Join us again next week. It's 3 o'clock West African time. Check the time zone in your country, wherever it is you're joining from. And be sure to join us again next week, Wednesday. It will be the first edition in July, and we'll be diving into something else, something interesting. Just keep your fingers crossed. And we look forward to reading from you, your comments, your responses, and sharing thoughts that you have. Follow us also on the social media platforms. It's at Climate Wednesday on all the platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You would find us there, and feel free to interact with us. It will be our pleasure to also engage with you. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Sheyi. Bye.